Howdy everybody, David Minkin here, starting player with Connect More, and I am super pumped today to present to you Avoid the Rules, a video of instruction and demonstration that helps ease rule understanding and learning. Easy start, and the reason why I'm so pumped is today we're going to talk about this game I got laid out here in front of me, Fire and Axe, a Viking saga. Now, I have to say, this game has provided one of the most enjoyable 5-player gaming experience I've had in years. And the reason for that will become evident throughout the rest of this video. Now, this game is for 3 to 5 players, but frankly speaking, if you only have 3, don't waste your time. So 4 to 5 players, and I personally find that the more the merrier. This is a great game to play with a full complement of people. And if you're looking for a game where you're going to be a Viking and there's going to be a lot of player interaction, a lot of screwage that goes on while you're moving around and trying to time your movements relative to other people and stick it to them at the appropriate moments and try to slip past them at the other appropriate moments and try to work your way to victory. Now, Fire and Axe has been a grail game for many people out there, and there's great news. Pandasaurus and IDW Games is in fact going to re-release this in the first quarter of 2015, and timing of this video right now is September 2014, so the timing might change. But a lot of people are extremely excited about seeing this game get reproduced for the masses. Now, if you're one of those people, hopefully this video will get you excited again. And if you're not one of those people, maybe this video will help you make a decision whether or not you should be excited about this game as well. Myself, well, I already got a copy, so I'm excited that more people are going to get this and be able to experience this game that I am truly enjoying right now. And the reason why I enjoy this is because there's a little bit of luck and press your luck component. There's dice in there. So again, if you don't like games with dice, walk away now. But I don't find that this is a critical factor. Other people, the main complaint they see about this game is that this is maybe too much or too luck dependent, especially if you're rolling poorly. The people who are rolling good, well, you'll never hear them complain about the dice. But we're going to get into more detail about the dice throughout the video, so hopefully you can make up your own mind as well. And there's going to be lots of other stuff that we're going to talk about, so please stay tuned and watch the video, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's dive right into Fire and Axe, a Viking saga. Here I've got the game set up for 4 players. I got red, I got blue, I got green, and I got yellow in each of the 4 corners of your screen. I got some common stuff in between yellow and red. These are the different gold tokens that we'll be earning throughout the course of the game, which are also worth victory points. And we have some common goods section. We got the Saga deck, some dice, and a few other little things which I'll talk about. And I've got the whole board set up. Now, the first thing I like to talk about when we talk about a brand new game is, well, how the heck am I supposed to win? Well, as you might have guessed, the Viking with the most victory points at the end of the game wins. Woohoo! Well, not really. That sounds kind of boring. Why don't we say the Viking with the most gold at the end of the game wins? Woohoo! Because throughout the course of the game, you're going to be doing different things that are actually going to earn you gold. And gold at the end of the game is exchanged 1 for 1 for victory points. Everything else are worth victory points, and that's the nomenclature that they use. But you'll see in the rule book, they sometimes use it interchangeably, gold versus victory points. Just know that if you have one, it's as good as the other. But there's a few things that make for a very unique experience in terms of the victory points. I would argue that 80% of your victory points earned are earned during the end game scoring. It may even be higher. So throughout the course of the game, you are planning for the end game scoring. That's all you're thinking about, is how I can get end game scoring. You're going to pick up victory points as you go along, but the bulk of the victory points you're going to pick up are going to be at the very end. The second thing that makes for a unique scoring experience, for me at least, is that there are things that you're going to be able to do that are going to earn you victory points throughout the game. As an example, you may be able to raid any of these town figurines that you see on here. So you see that there are actually, if I can pick this up, there are some small towns here that you'll be able to raid with your longboat and your Viking crew. And there are some large cities that you'll be able to raid with your Viking and your longboat as well. And if you successfully raid these, they are actually worth different victory points, which are kept hidden on the bottom of their bases here. And so the other players don't actually know how many victory points you get for actually achieving these. Only you would know that. So throughout the course of the game, you start to see people starting to accomplish some of these raids and be successful. You can only then start to speculate as to how many victory points that they may have underneath there. And there's always some uncertainty surrounding the end game scoring, so what people might get. So it provides for a really interesting dynamic and an interesting push for the end of game scoring, because there's still that uncertainty as to how everything's going to lay out at the very end. So for me, the fact that most of the scoring is done at the very end of the game and there's some unknowns, especially with other players, as to how they're going to score, provides for a very unique scoring mechanism and a thrilling game, because you still have that adrenaline and the unknown and that excitement going into the final scoring round. So let's talk about these things that you need to work towards to actually score victory points at the end of the game. Now, as you may imagine, in a game with the subtitle of Vikings Saga, you and your fellow Vikings, you're probably going to have to be doing a variety of sagas throughout the course of the game, and that is absolutely correct. In fact, there's even what's referred to as the Saga deck here. And at the beginning of the game, you set the Saga deck into the 3 different eras that the game consists of, and each of the eras is actually going to have 6 Saga cards in it. In fact, the game comes with 9 Saga cards each, but at the beginning of the game, you take 3 of the cards randomly from each of the era and you remove them. Now you'll notice in Saga 1 there's only 3 cards here in the deck. Well, why? Because you'll notice that here at the center of the board there's 3 of these Saga cards that are face up. And so at any point in time when one of these Saga cards is actually accomplished by one of the Vikings that are playing, then you would simply just peel the next card off the top of the deck and you would replace it like so. Now I'm going to get into the actual mechanics of that in a little bit, but the reason why I want to point out the Saga cards right now is because arguably the Saga cards are the backbone of this game. They do a variety of things. One, they provide a timing mechanism for the game, because the game end will trigger when the final Saga card is taken from the deck and added to one of these 3 spots here in the center of the board. And there's a couple different ways that the game will actually end, and I'll describe that later when I actually go through the game. So it's going to provide a timing mechanism for the game. The second thing that it's going to do is they provide victory points at the very end of the game. So let me just explain how this is going to work. Is if you take a look at any one of these Saga cards, the Saga cards has a variety of things on it. First of all, it's going to have a home port associated with it. And there are 3 home ports throughout the game. There's Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. And these are referred to as the home ports. Any one of these Saga cards is actually going to be associated with one of these home ports. And I'm going to get into this in more detail, but effectively you can think of this as the suit. This is the suit of the card. Then you go down below and you'll notice that there's this little bit of text. And there's 3 different things that you can do to actually accomplish this Saga card. You can either trade, you can either raid, and again here you notice this is a Norway suit card, or you can settle. And here we got settle. Now, conveniently enough, these are the 3 different tasks that you can complete throughout the game in any one of these ports that you see. And again, recall that the ports are these circles with a little white line throughout them. Now the way the Saga cards work is this is an automatic thing. If on your turn you achieve one of the conditions to actually accomplish this Saga card, then you actually get to take it immediately and add it into your hand. And why is that important? It's because these are going to provide short-term goals for you along the way. So for example, this particular card, the Sweden card, once all 3 cities here have been traded with, and they're indicated here, then the player who actually trades with the 3rd and final port actually gets a card. So too bad if you traded with any of the previous 2 ports, you don't get the card until all 3 ports have been traded with, until every condition on this card has been met. And so that introduces amongst the players a really great timing mechanism as well for your moves, because you may be looking at this card and you might be seeing that, well, maybe one of these ports have been traded with, but the other 2 are open, and then you see someone else sailing around in their longboat and they're close to the area, and you go, oh, if I go in and I put in that second trade at one of these ports, so then he's just going to swoop right in and whisk the card away from me. So then it adds a timing mechanism along with these short-term goals throughout the game. But from a long-term perspective, what makes these Saga cards so interesting and why I'm talking about them in conjunction with victory points throughout the game is the player who has the most cards, Saga cards completed in their home area of any one of these home ports. So you'll look at Sweden individually, you'll look at Norway individually, and you'll look at Denmark individually. The person who has most of these cards completed will get 10 victory points at the end of the game per card. So it's huge. You have to be paying attention to who's getting what, because if someone has the lead in Sweden, say for example they get 3, maybe 4 cards, that's 40 victory points. That's a ton of points. So you have to be alert, you have to be paying attention to what people are getting, and it's going to dictate, it's going to possibly change some of your short-term strategies throughout the game so that you can focus on the scoring at the end of the game or your long-term strategy. And it's just an awesome mechanism. It's really great. The more you play with it, the more you really come to appreciate how these Saga cards work. Now, so again, these Saga cards, as soon as it's accomplished, you just simply take it and a new card is complete. So that's the Saga cards. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. I'm going to break down the cards in more detail later on in the video, and we'll see them talked about as I do some more of the run through. So how else can we get victory points? Well, we talked about these different tasks that you can do in any of these ports. There was trade, raid, and settle. Well, trade is quite simply, if you have your longboat and you are in any one of these ports, you can simply, if you have one of these goods on your longboat, and I'll show you how you do it, you would simply just take this good token and you would trade it with the port. And so what you would simply do is you would just put it on top of the port that you're in, and you would get the victory points equal to the value of the port. So in this particular case, you're in Hamburg, you would get 3 points for trading that good. But as it turns out, there's also this section down in here called your goods in demand area. And this is in the lower left part of the board. And at the beginning of the game, it starts with furs. Whatever good is in this area will add 2 victory points to any port that you trade with if you're trading that same good. So there are different ways throughout the game, different cards that can be played that will actually change what this good in demand is, so you can keep alert as to what this is to add a few extra victory points along the way. Now, a point about trading, if you're trading in any one of these 3 ports, you have to look at all of the ports by their colors and group them together. So these 3 ports belong in a group, those 3 green ports belong in a group, and you can see them around. These yellow ports belong in a group. There are some ports or cities that do not belong in a group, they're all by themselves, but generally you'll see that these ports are colored in groups of 3. That's important for several reasons. The reason why it's important for trading is because if you've already traded a particular good with one of the ports, you cannot trade that same good with the other 2 ports. You'd have to trade one of these other goods, you know, maybe this particular good, you could trade that. And so then finally, if you traded that and you're in that port, and you can trade with this this figurine still on there, it doesn't really matter. And actually, in fact, sometimes you want to, because that's going to help with your rating, which I'll talk about. And so finally here for the 3rd port, you'd have no choice but to actually trade the 3rd and final good, as there are only 3 types of goods throughout the game. So that's trading. That's just a basic way to be able to get some small victory points along the way. And so if you traded here again with Hamburg, that goes back here, and fur was the good in demand, you would have gotten 3 plus 2, that would have been $5. So you just simply go over to the gold, you would take 3, 4, 5, and then you would take it, and that will count 1-for-1 exchange for victory points again at the end of the game. So that's trading. The next thing that you're going to get victory points doing is by raiding. Now, raiding is what you're thinking, like, nah, finally, we're talking Viking stuff. Let's go raid. Let's go pillage. Let's go get this stuff. Well, raiding can only occur in these cities where you actually see a figurine at the beginning of the game. And quite simply, again, you'd have to have your longboat in the port that you want to raid. And if you successfully raid this port, you would actually get this small little figurine that comes with it. And you don't actually show anybody, but you can secretly look yourself and you can see how many points are associated with that. So at the end of the game, you will score 3 victory points for actually having this little village in your playing area. So if you successfully raid, and I'll talk about how you do that during the turn sequence, but if you successfully raid, then you add it to your playing area. Now, throughout the course of the game, you'll be collecting all of these different figurines, and should at the end of the game you have the most figurines in your playing area, you're the most successful raider, then you would get what's called the Bloodied Axe bonus, and that just sounds awesome. And what that simply does is it adds 3 points to every one of these figurines for final endgame scoring. So this particular figurine, if this was part of your Bloodied Axe bonus, you'd get 3 points for the points below, and then you would get another 3 points just for having it, so that'd be 6 points. Now, the victory points that are below each of these villages, they vary. Like this is a pretty big one, that's 6. And so there is a little bit of a luck involved as to which ones you're going to get. And the bigger ones have just higher values to them. The bigger ones have values 8, 10, and 12, as there are 3 of them. 1, 2, 3 throughout the game. So that's how you're going to raid. But again, it's one of these things, once you start going on it, you kind of want to commit, because that Bloodied Axe bonus is a huge bonus. But similarly, if you see somebody who's actually committing to that strategy and starting to take away and getting a lot of these town figurines and city figurines, maybe you want to start getting some off of his plate as well. Maybe you want to get some, make it unavailable for them, because otherwise they'll get that bonus and it'll be huge. So that's another way you're going to get victory points that are going to all count at the end of the game, because throughout the game nobody else will actually know what you scored for these. You can speculate, but you'll never know for sure. Now, when we talk about settling, this is another way that you are going to get some serious victory points. And the way that you're going to settle, and again, if you're in any one of these ports, is then you can simply settle, and if you had a crewman, and I'll show you exactly how to do this, but if you settle a port, you don't get any immediate victory points for that, but you would see you get settle a port. Then, at the very end of the game, you would get the number of victory points equal to the number beside the port. So this guy here is a measly 2 victory points that you get at the end of the game. That's not really a significant deal. But suppose you had a second guy, and again, you want to consider the region where all the ports are. So here's this region here contains these 3 ports. So now if there is a second guy, and it does not have to be your own, if there is a second guy here, you actually double up the value of the ports. So instead of this guy being worth 2, he's actually worth 2 times 2. So he's worth 4, and this guy's worth 4. So now for having those 2 ports, it's worth 8 points to you as opposed to just the 4. If they were, say, in separate regions, for example. Now, let's kick it up a notch. Suppose yellow was over there. He has settled a port that's part of this region. They're all the same color. It doesn't matter that he's a different colored player. You will all get a 3 times multiplier now. So now this port's worth 6, that's worth 6, that's worth 6. So now red has gotten 12, and yellow just sneaks in there, and if just for one guy, he's able to get 6 points. And that's a fantastic strategy, because one thing I find is if you really start trying to get all 3 guys in different ports, what's going to happen on this board is, since nothing is actually going to clutter the board up throughout the course of the game, people will see, and their attention will be drawn to clumps of similar colors, and you, my friend, will have an X put on your back. You, my friend, will have other Vikings raging fury upon you. You, my friend, may just find you're in in Valhalla feasting with the gods, because what you want to do, and make up your own mind, but what I find works out quite well is if you can scatter your guys around as parts of these trees, you get the benefit of the multiplier without really drawing a lot of attention to yourself. Now, the one thing I should point out, and we'll talk about it in the gameplay, is you cannot settle any city or any of these ports, pardon me, until all of the cities have been raided. So for example, you cannot come in here and settle Hamburg while this city is still here. So this city would have to be raided first and removed, and then you'd have no cities or towns within either one of these ports, and then only then could you actually start to settle. So that's another huge way that you will be earning victory points. And again, you don't get them throughout the game, but you're going to score them at the end of the game when all the dust settles. And there's a lot of great screwage that will occur, and this occurs with these Rune Cards here. And I'm going to go into these Rune Cards in a lot more detail with the card description later, but trust me, just because you put a settlement there, or just because you did some of these things, doesn't mean you're safe. There's a lot of screwage that can occur, and at the beginning of the game, everybody is actually going to get one of these Rune Cards. So those are all the ways you can score victory points, and as you can see, most of those victory points are in fact scored at the very end of the game. The one exception are the trading victory points that you're going to get. And I should also point out, there are a variety of Saga cards that actually have victory points that you can actually score with them. So for example, if I look at this Swedish card here, if you complete this Saga card here, you also get 4 victory points, and that you would achieve right away. You can pick that up and just put it, just take the gold coins and put it away. That's another way you can do it, but you may or may not get those throughout the course of the game. So I'm going to briefly talk about some of the other parts of the board that I have not yet mentioned before we jump into the actual gameplay and some of the things that you need to be aware of when you're actually playing this game. First thing I want to point out is there are 4 different regions here on the map, and they're colored differently, and they're also separated by these red dashed lines here. So you have the northern region, which is white and frosty looking, and then you come here into the western region, which is this dark blue color. Then you go over to the eastern region, and again here you see the separation here and another separation down here, and it's kind of more of an aquamarine, let's call it. And then you come down here in more like kind of a greeny blue, and this is the southern region here. And these are the 4 different regions that you're going to be sailing your longboat through. Now each of these regions is also indicated here on the compass, and you'll notice that there's a number associated with them. Now when you're sailing your boats through these regions, you are limited as to how many good days of sailing you might expect to actually be traveling through these regions. And so it's defined here by these numbers here. So if you're sailing into the north, you only have 3 good days of sailing, and this will make sense in a little bit. If you're sailing through the east, 4, through the south, this is the balmy Mediterranean, you got 6 good days of sailing, and in the west only 5. But you also notice that there's this small little dial associated with there with 2 zeros, a -1, and a +1. These are modifiers to these numbers you see out there. So throughout the course of the game, mainly when you're playing Rune cards, you also have the option to be able to turn this modifier a quarter turn one way or the other. And so if you're planning for a big sail, for example, up into the north, currently right now you only have 2 good days of sailing because you have 3 minus 1. By turning it a quarter, I've added an extra day of good sailing, and this makes a big difference, which I'll talk about in the gameplay, as to how you're going to be able to advance your crew into that region. And you turn it another quarter, well now you've turned it all the way around. It's a good season up in the north. There's 4 good days of sailing, whereas down in the south now there's only 5. 6 minus 1, and the 2 on the east and the west are unaffected. Again, the way you get that is by discarding Rune cards if you don't want to play it, or by playing the Rune card, and then you get the option of turning it a quarter turn. We'll talk about that in the gameplay, but that's just so you can be aware of that's what's going to control how far you can actually go with your longboat before you're actually paying a penalty. There is going to be the penalty that's associated with that, which is indicated on this table here. We got the goods in demand, which I described. And the last thing I want to talk about is then going to be your actual playing area. Now, each player's longboat is represented in their playing area by this circular disc here. And it's really cool. I quite like this because you're going to see your longboat in your player color. And then you're going to see again a bunch of spaces associated with phase 1. And once we get into phase 2, we get an additional space. And then finally we get a 7th space in phase 3. Now each of these phases is triggered again when the first Saga card from that phase is actually added face up to one of these 3 spots. So when the last card from phase 1 has been achieved, you take it, the player takes it, and then the first card from Saga 2 has been added. And the reason why that's important is because each of these spots on the longboat represent spaces available on your boat to either carry your crew members. So here's your crew right here, and so you got a whole plethora of these guys to start off. He's carrying an axe and looking quite menacing. So you can just plunk him on there, and that represents a crew member on your longboat. Or you can also use your longboat to transport goods. So again, the goods are that nice little shape there, so you can actually put goods on there for if you want to go do some trading. Now again, you'll need these guys here if you want to go do some raiding and settling as well. But in the first phase, you're limited to how much you can actually load your boat up. But as the game progresses, you get additional spaces. So again, you're limited to only carrying 5 things as a maximum on your longboat in phase 1, but then 6 in phase 2, and then finally 7 in phase 3. So that's how your longboat is actually represented throughout the game, whereas on the board, your longboat is just a plastic boat moving around to keep track of where you are. And again, I mentioned we got the wintering box and we have the 3 home ports right here. And finally, I should mention these 3 dice that you see over here. I've been kind of ignoring them up till now, but yes, dice are involved throughout this game. In particular, they're used for trading and raiding, and they're also used to resolve some of the different Rune cards that exist. But some people will complain, the complaints that I'm reading on Board Game Geek and other forums is that they don't feel they throw the dice enough for them to average out throughout the course of the game. Other people feel they're just having a bad day, they're doing all this work, they spend 3 turns sailing down, to Spain somewhere, only to have their dice fail them, and they get very frustrated. So if you don't like that type of mechanism in a game, well then maybe this won't be the game for you. I personally love it because, back with the Vikings, I like to think, like, is Odin favorable upon me? Am I going to live another day before I'm feasting with the gods? And there is that luck component to it. But have no fear, there are also some ways to mitigate your luck throughout the course of the game. There are some Rune cards, and again I'll describe them later, that actually help you with your dice rolls. And as I mentioned before, if you trade with with any one of these ports, and so one of these ports would actually have a good icon on them, if you were to come, I'll take this off here, if you were to come and actually settle this, your dice roll that you need to settle is actually going to be 1 less than you normally would. So normally you have to roll a value greater than what the port value is. But if there is a good in that port, well then that value gets reduced by 1. So then you're able to increase your odds of actually being able to achieve that. Now if you traded goods with a city, like so, then again you'd have to come and raid the city, and again you have to roll dice for raiding the city, and you have to roll a number higher than the port value, but the mechanism in which you do it is actually going to be slightly different. But again, this will reduce this value by 1. So it's a way to help you mitigate your dice rolls. So maybe a strategy for those of you who are really sucking on the dice rolls is, well, go do some trading or find ports that have been traded with, and then go there. Go and attack them. And so there is some dice mitigation. I don't believe it's still good enough for some people. It's great for me. There have been some games where I just get pounded on, yet I've still emerged victorious because I was able to adapt to my crappy dice rolling and do something else. So let's put all of this knowledge together. We're going to do a quick turn sequence so you can also understand this track that I've not yet talked about. And you're going to see how exactly you're going to mechanically play this game. It plays like that. It's going to be very simple. We're almost done. So what does your turn look like? Well, the best way to describe it is you have 1 week or 7 days for you and your crew to complete all the actions you want to complete on your turn. And that's why you see you have this days track here. You have 1 point for each day of the week, so 1 through 7. So I guess the Vikings don't take rest on Sunday, so they work straight through to Sunday. But there are also these 2 icons here. There's 2 little tokens to kind of keep track of what you're doing on your turn. There's this one token which is a sailing token, and the reason why you have a sailing token is because one of your actions on your turn is going to be able to sail your longboat from one adjacent sea spot to another adjacent sea spot. So anytime you cross over one of these white lines, that would count as one of your actions, and so you start at 0, you move your sailing icon. The reason why you care about that is, again, we go back to this dial over here as to how many safe sailing days there are in any particular region on the board. So you need to keep track of your sailing actions separately from your other actions, so you can keep in mind this dial over here. The other token you have is what's called a preparation token, because the other actions that you can take is, if your longboat is inside the wintering box, so you're here again is your longboat. If you were there, then you would take your disc in your playing area and you can start loading it up. So the first thing you can start doing is you need to load up crew. You cannot sail your longboat unless you have at least 1 crew. So by putting a crew on there, that counts as 1 action. So I'd take my preparation and I'd move them 1. So then I could continue doing this. I could add another crew, and maybe I'm going to add a good. So I'm going to take the good on demand right now, fur is in demand right now, and I'll add that. So it costs me 1 action for each of these things. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I would move my preparation token up 4. So now I have 3 remaining actions that I can do. So I feel pretty comfortable with that. Off I go. I'm going to go do some sailing. So I'm going to take my boat from the wintering box, and it's free. It does not count as an action, but I can go to any one of these home ports right here. So you can go to Norway, Denmark, or Sweden, and this is typically depends on where you want to sail your boat. So here, for example, I might want to go down to Denmark because I want to kind of maybe jump into here and maybe do something right away into these areas. So I'll come to Denmark, and that's free. The other action you have available to you is you can draw a Rune card, and you can draw as many Rune cards as you want. The hand limit is 3, but you can draw a Rune card. You take it and just take the top one off the deck, add it to your play area, and that also counts as an action. So I've drawn that, and I go, maybe I want to draw another Rune card, get up to my hand limit, I'm not sure, or maybe I want to get down into one of these ports. So I'll just stop for right there. Now the one thing is although you can draw Rune cards in these home ports, you may not play a Rune card in one of these home ports. This is only the place where you can draw them. It's important to note that from here I move directly to the wintering box. Even if I was sailing, I could sail back into one of these home ports just for the sole purpose of picking up a Rune card if I wanted to. But anyhow, I digress. So here we are, we've taken 5 actions so far, so I could proceed to sail out, and anytime you cross one of these white lines, and you see there's white lines around each of these ports, that costs you a sailing. So I'm going to take 1 sailing action, so now I have a total of 5 plus 1 is 6, and then I might say, okay, I'm going to sail into Hamburg here. So I sail into Hamburg, into the port. That's my second sailing action, and it's a total of 5 actions. So my week is complete. I've taken a full week. I've loaded up my crew. I've loaded up my longboat. I've done some sailing. I got a Rune card. But when you are in the port, you can do one of 3 tasks. And I've talked about these before when I was talking about the Saga Cards. You can trade, you can raid, and you can settle. And what's really interesting about this, I've described all of the actions that you can do. Those are the things that actually count towards you using up your turn. Whereas once you get into the port and all the things that you think stereotypically of Vikings doing, like trading and raiding and settling areas, well, those are just simply a task for the Viking. They don't count towards your actions. So I'm here, I'm like, you know what? I am going to trade. I cannot settle because this region of 3 still actually has a town that needs to be raided first. But I can trade, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to trade it, and it's a good on demand, so I get 5 points. And so I can still do that because it does not count as an action on my turn. It was simply a task. Now the one thing to keep in mind is once you are in a port, you may only attempt to achieve 1 task in any one port. You may, if I had the time available, if my boat was out and I still had sailing days available, you may sail out and go into another port and try to do a different task there as well. But in any one port, you can only ever do 1 task. So I'm sitting there, there's really nothing I can do right now. So I have a couple choices. I can stay there. The nice thing about staying there is nobody else can go into a port if you're in it. So by staying in a port, there can only ever be 1 longboat inside any one port. You can be multiple boats within any one of these sea spaces, but inside a port, only 1. Again, there's a few cards, like intimidation cards, that may affect that. Somebody might come in and just kick you out, but I'm going to stay there. The other option I have, and again, you may at any time choose to take your longboat and put it back into the wintering box. That does not count as an action, but there's a couple consequences of doing that. The first consequence is you would have to take whatever's left in your longboat and reduce it down to only 1 crew member. So you may keep 1 crew member there, but if you have any excess guys there, you lose them off your longboat. So in your subsequent turn, you're going to have to take additional actions to build up your crew again. The second thing that going to the wintering box does is no matter how many actions I may have left available to me on this day's track, it ends your turn immediately. So typically you're going to find the wintering box is going to be the only place where you can load up with crew and goods. You may go to the wintering box at the end of anywhere from 1 to 3 turns before you've kind of used up all your guys or made your attempt at doing some trading and raiding, whatever, and you need to go back into the wintering box, reload up your supplies, and then head back out for another voyage. And the cool thing about that is because it always draws you back to the central part of the board. If you're starting to see some of these Saga cards and you need things down over here, and it's going to require maybe a couple turns to get down there and plan for that, and you need lots of guys, and you see other people trying to do it, it's a real timing mechanism for you to figure out when you get back there, when you load up, and when you think you can make the push for a particular area, and when you can time that with trying to get, for example, some of these some of these cards that require, you know, 3 different, like this for example, 3 different regions have to be settled, is you got to time your preparation on your longboat with the timing such that you'll get the 3rd and final settlements here, so that you might be able to take this card, and then you're always watching other players to do it, and there's going to be a little bit of your push your luck with it, and all those dynamics just work so well together. It's just amazing. So anyhow, that's the end of the red player's turn. He's done. He's going to stop, and so we reset the track back here, and then now it would be blue's turn. So around and around you go, and it's just that simple. So I'm not going to go into all of the explanation for each of the other players. I'm not going to work through their turns, and you know, I guess I should take these guys off. That was from the example from before, but they actually weren't there yet. Let's go, and I'm just going to show you what rating and settling looks like, because they're slightly different, and then you've got the gist of the game. So let's take a look very quickly at rating. So to talk about rating, I'm going to take my lovely little red longboat here, and I'm going to put it over here in Bremen. And we're going to assume that he's in the port. I'm not worried about the actual turn sequence right now. We're not fussed about that. We're just going to go in here and we're saying, right, I want to raid Bremen. And in order to do that, I first need to look at how many crew members I have on my longboat. So here again on my longboat, I see that I actually have 3 crew members. So for each crew member up to a maximum of 3, it allows me to roll 1 die. So then I look at that, I'm like, right, I'm going to take 3 dice, the 3 dice here, and I'm going to attempt to raid this settlement right here. Now, in order to do that, for raiding, you only roll 1 die at a time. These are kept off to the side, and I must roll a number larger than the number of the port. So here the value is 3. I must roll a 4, 5, or 6. So I got a 50-50 chance. I'm going to roll 3 die. I should be able to do it. Let's see. So I roll the first roll, and it's a 3. So that's not good. It's equal to. So then what I do is I take one of my crew mem off my longboat card in my play area, and I remove him. Okay, no problem. I got another die. I'm going to roll him, and I roll a 6. Woohoo! So I have successfully raided this Bremen here, and so I see I take a look. I'm a little bit bummed because it's only 3 victory points, but that's okay. Maybe I'll get the bloodied axe. I add it to my play area, and that's that. So I do not have to take a crew member off of my boat. I just simply take the town piece off, and I still have 2 crew members. But maybe if I just stay here till my next turn, I can then attempt to try to settle this, because now there's no actual city place in there. Maybe that's an option, so I'll do that my next turn. So let's pretend that we've gone all the way around. I've camped out here, and I'm going to try to settle. Now, settling works the same as raiding in terms of how many dice you get to roll. So for settling, you can get up to a maximum of 3 dice, but in this particular example, since I only have 2 crew members on my longboat, I can actually only roll 2 dice. I cannot roll that 3rd dice anymore because I don't have a crew member for it to represent. So I take these 2 dice, but now instead of rolling individually like I did for raiding, I'm going to roll these 2 dice together. So it's a 1 shot. I roll these 2 dice, and here are my results. And again, I need to get a result that's greater than the value of the port. This value is not greater. So again, for him, I would lose a crew member. So he goes off my boat. And then this value is greater. And this worked out really great because it's going to show you a great example here. So now I have a choice. I can take this crew member off of my longboat card, and I just simply put him on that port like so. But then you'll notice that my longboat is crewless. There's nobody there. So I must take my boat and put it back into the wintering box, and I'm done. I could, if I chose to, I might say, you know what? For whatever reason, this guy is way too important to me. I will not settle that port. I could forego that result. I still lost the other guy, and I could keep him there and keep 1 guy on my boat. Now, why you'd want to do that, I guess that's for you to figure out. But in this particular case, I'm going to say, well, no, sorry, dude. You are going here. So in this example, unlike raiding, you do take one of your crew members from your longboat, and you actually add it to the port. But now my longboat's without a crew, so he goes back up to the wintering box to store up on your next turn and hopefully build on that. Now, the one thing I wanted to point out, and I've talked about before, during my trading and raiding examples, had this good been here, had I traded or had somebody else traded a good, doesn't matter which good again, as long as it's different from any of the other 2, the value that I would have needed to beat on any of my dice rolls, whether it be raiding or settling, would have only had to been a value of 2 instead of 3. So this is a way to modify the dice you need to roll. So one particular strategy you may want to do is either follow up with people who are actually trading in city or town ports, or trade yourself, wait till your next turn, and then you can try to raid or settle depending on whatever the condition is. So that guy will stay there, and again, you won't get any victory points for this until at the end of the game, where possibly there might be some other multipliers here if other people have came and settled the same region as yours as well. That is the turn sequence. Very simple, very quick, very basic game. A few details just to mop up this explanation, just so that I don't leave you in the dark about some of these things. I mentioned before that these Saga cards are what's going to actually trigger the end game, in addition to the scoring that I described earlier. So what's going to happen is, suppose we go out throughout the course of the game and everyone's scoring these, achieving these Saga cards, and then finally we get to the very end and I flip over the last Saga card and the Saga deck is completely empty. Now what's going to happen here is the player to the left of the person who actually puts this down will take one of these 3 tokens here. You see there's 3 tokens, 3, 2, 1. So if it was on my turn and it was on Red's turn and I added this Denmark, it was the last card, the deck is empty, the player to my left, the blue player, will take this 3 and he'll put it down in front of him. Now what this means is there are exactly 3 full rounds or turn sequences left before the game is over. So then you would continue playing around until it gets to the blue player again, then he'd replace the 3 with a 2. Now there's 2, and then it gets back to him again, and this indicates that this is the last and final round. Now this is one way that the game will end, so finally it'll go and it'll finish with him, and then that's the final game, that's the end of the game. Or if during that time all 3 of these cards have actually been achieved, then the game ends immediately when that condition is met. So you have a timing mechanism, but if before that timing mechanism these 3 cards have all been achieved, taken by somebody, then the game ends immediately. Speaking of things that happen immediately when they occur, I want to mop up this description of the game a little bit with just talking about the actual navigation incident table and how you actually move your boats along here and if you get penalized for it. So you'll refer to the fact that I was talking about these numbers here, and that's basically how many spots you're allowed to sail your longboat without any incident, if you will, or any. So if, for example, I got my red boat here, I can start sailing him, and suppose I want to take him up somewhere over here. So I might sail him, go 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've sailed him 4 days there, because each day is when you cross over one of these white lines, and for doing so I've actually moved my sailing action token up to the 4th day. Now during that whole time I was sailing over here in the western region, and I'm allowed up to 5 free sailing days here. You see the modifier is 0, so I'm good. But then as soon as I cross over into the north, that's my 5th sailing day, I am well past the amount of sailing days I'm allowed to do in the north. In the north, I'm only allowed to do 3 minus 1, so I'm only allowed to have 2 free sailing days before it becomes too rough and too rugged for my crew. So I'm only allowed to do 2 free sailing days, and I'm clearly over. I have taken 5 sailing days, the difference is 3. So you look down at this navigation incident table, and it tells you how many days you're allowed to go over. So for example, in this particular case, I've gone over 3 days, and it tells me I need to lose 2 guys or 2 goods. So what you do is you go to your boat and you take a look, and I can take a good or a crewman or a combination of the 2, and I remove these 2 guys immediately. They could not handle the cold. They froze and it fell overboard, or they just couldn't take it. So I removed them, and I'm still reduced down to 3. I can continue sailing, but I took care of that immediately when that occurs. So I'm at day 5, and then I could maybe go up into this port here, and that's for day 6. So now again, day 6 is 4 days over, and I consult, and in this particular instance it's 3 or 4, so I'm still good because it's still only a loss of 2. So that's the sailing. You need to take it into consideration immediately when it occurs. So the summary here is you can only lose a maximum of up to 3. If you find that the calculation's not quite working out, make sure you're not penalizing yourself twice. So that's the game. Let's take a look at the Rune cards and the Saga cards in more detail. If you don't want to look at that, just skip ahead to some of my final thoughts. I gave most of my final thoughts and my opinions about the game while I was talking about it because I feel it's more rich and I feel it gives more flavor to the actual description of the game. But please stay tuned for the rest of the analysis. Now, with any game that relies so heavily on some of its cards for the end game scoring, I like to dissect those cards just a little bit further, just so that I can understand them better and understand how the deck is built a little bit better, so hopefully improve my gameplay next time I'm playing, because trust me, my gameplay needs all the help it can get. So what you see here are all of the 27 Saga cards laid out in front of you, and they are organized by row, and each row is a different era. So here we have era 1 on the top row. Here in the middle row we have era 2, and here on the bottom row we have era 3. Now keep in mind, even though each era that I've indicated here has a total of 9 cards on it, at the very beginning of the game you're going to remove 3 cards randomly from each era individually. So 3 cards will be removed from that row, 3 from this row, and 3 from that row. And that's going to change what's actually in the deck, and that might actually change some of the analysis we're going to currently do. But I'm going to take all of the cards right now and put them together, but keep in mind that it's going to add to the variability or perhaps even the replayability for you by taking out different cards randomly, and is going to change what you might expect and what you might actually receive in the deck throughout the gameplay. Now, I have further subdivided all of these cards by the different suits, or essentially the home ports. So we have the Norway home port over here, which is indicated with these 3 columns of cards here. In the center, we have the Denmark suit, or the Denmark home port cards here, which are these 3 columns here. And then over to the right we have the Sweden port, or the Sweden suit, and again there's these 3 columns here. And I've divided each of the suits, or each of the home ports, by 3 columns, as in trade is the leftmost column, raid is the center column, and settle is the right column. And the reason why I do that is that essentially mimics what you're kind of doing throughout the game. In any one port, especially if it's heavy fortified, it might behoove you to actually trade there first to minimize your risk in trying to actually raid that place. And again, you must raid any of the cities that exist before you actually have a chance to settle, or even settle any of the adjacent cities which are in the same regions or towns. So is trade, raid, and settle, as you might expect. So each one of these suits, the 3 columns are in that order: trade, raid, settle, trade, raid, settle, and again for Sweden, trade, raid, settle. So why did I break it out this way? Well, you can sit back and kind of study the cards any way that makes sense for you. First of all, I want to look at the suits individually, and the reason why I want to do that is recall at the very end of the game, the person who actually holds majority in any one of these suits gets 10 points for every single card that they have in that suit. That is huge. That is massive. It's not just 10 points. It's 10 points for each card. And if you finish second place for that suit, then you will get 5 points for every card. So it's extremely important to be paying attention to what people are collecting and what people are going after throughout the course of the game. And it's also good to understand what's perhaps coming to see if you might be able to come back from behind. So let's take Denmark, for example. You see that there's this general progression of cards that come this way. And you see that Denmark, it starts in phase 1 as trade and raid, then you go from raid and 1 settle, and then you go to finally all settle. So you can see if you're starting to chase the Denmark cards that near the end of the game, as the game progresses into phase 3, you're not going to be trading and raiding anymore. You must be settling, you must be focusing on the settle strategy. And if that's not a part of your strategy, if you're doing something different, well, perhaps the Denmark cards of the Denmark suit isn't going to be the one that you're really after, unless of course you're trying to block somebody else from it. Then go for it. And you also see that there are a couple ones here. For example, this top one, it also gives you an additional 10 victory points as well for accomplishing this particular Saga card. So you know, well, perhaps that might be in the deck, but don't count on it. It might be one of the ones removed. So Denmark is a really easy progression to show. You go from trading and raiding all the way down to finally where you're only settling. Now let's go look at these Norwegians over here. Well, the Norwegians are scattered around a little bit. At the beginning of the game, all they're interested in is raiding and maybe a little bit of settling. And then in the middle, no raiding whatsoever, and then finally at the end, all they're interested in is settling as well. So you can see in the mid-game, Denmark is raiding, but Norway has no interest, whereas at the beginning of the game, Norway is raiding, and Denmark is starting to think about it. They only have 1 card compared to Norway's 2. So you can see that with these 2 guys, at the end of the game, the phase 3 is definitely the focus is on settling. So if you're going for any one of these 2 suits, you got to be focused for the final phase that people are going to be making a mad dash for settling. So keep that in mind. Then we go over to the Swedens, and The Swedes, they're kind of scattered around all over the place. They almost make a perfect matrix, almost a perfect 3x3. They just have a little extra trading power here in the first era. But other than that, they're kind of scattered around. So you can take comfort in the fact that, you know, these are going to be popping up likely throughout the game, but there's only going to be really one of each thing throughout the era. So if you see one of them pop up, for example, in Era 2, you see the raid card pop up, then you know there's not going to be another Swedish raid card pop up in Era 2. So then you might start focusing, if this is a suit you're after, well, maybe it's time to settle or to trade. So I just point that out to you because it's really interesting to see the progression of these suits, because you are collecting these suits. It's a huge part of the game to be collecting these cards and to be able to cash them in at the beginning of the game. So you have to understand how these suits work and maybe which ones you want to start targeting if it fits in other parts of your strategy. For example, if you're really going for that bloody axe strategy, well then maybe something along the Denmark line of things will help you out, especially in the middle era. You might be able to go do some raiding. But all of this, the extra mix to this, which is just fantastic, is that if you're going after this stuff, sometimes it's not just you who is going to actually be required to achieve this. Like, for example, if you look at any of these settling cards, it requires 3 different places to actually be settled. But the only person who actually gets this card is the person who has actually achieved the 3rd and final one. And I can bet you, if you're playing with heads-up players, no one is going to let you come in here and settle all 3 of these without one person thinking about coming in and whipping this card away from you. So then there's also that huge timing component to it. So let's take a step back for a second here, and instead of focusing on each of these suits and each of these home ports individually, why don't we take a look at each of these eras individually and break down the cards a little bit that way. And the reason why this is important, well in my mind anyhow, is by looking at the breakdown of cards by era, you're going to see the natural progression of the game and what your strategies are going to have to change to in order to reach the end of the game. Because again, recall that the cool thing about this game is that the Saga cards act as a timing mechanism, end game mechanism, and huge victory point scoring mechanisms. So you need to understand how the game is meant to progress so that maybe you can start focusing and planning for certain things along the way. So if we take a look at the first era, the top row here, you'll see that the emphasis is on trade. You'll see that there are 2 trade cards for Sweden and 2 trade cards for Denmark. That's 4 out of a total 9 cards. But again, recall, it would be possible that perhaps all 3 of those cards were taken out at the beginning of the game, and then now you've only got 1 trade card out of 6 in the stack. But you know, chances are you probably have a few more trade cards than that, but you know, that's something to keep in mind. And then beyond that, you have 3 raid cards, and then you just got 2 settle cards. So the emphasis in the first era is definitely on trading, again looking at all 9 cards without considering any of them being removed. So that again will add to the flavor of the game, because it'll change dramatically the way that the game actually starts depending on which of these 3 cards were removed. And then we progress down to the second era here, or the middle row. And you'll see that the emphasis on trading has actually been reduced a little bit. You see that there's only, in fact, 2 cards now. It's been reduced by half, trading from Sweden and from Norway. And then we see that settling is starting to become a little bit more important throughout the game, because now you actually have 2 settles here, 1 from Denmark and 1 from Sweden, which is a total of 4. So now instead of having 4 trades, we have 4 settles. And now the raiding is starting to occur. We actually have 3 raids right here, which is exactly the same as what we had in fact in the first era. Then we come down to the third era, and again what we pointed out before is settling now is becoming the dominant feature. 7 of the 9 possible cards are all settling cards. So again, that's something to keep in mind. Near the end of the game, you're going to want to be trying to settle these different places. And if you take a closer look at some of these cards as to the actual locations that need to be settled, you'll see that they're actually some of them are starting to move progressively further away from the home ports and are helping you push out further beyond the different boundaries and to explore further. And so this adds a whole new wrinkle to the game, because now I find, especially near the end of the game, you're more focused on that dial that's changing the actual favorable conditions for sailing, because sometimes you need to kind of turn the winds in your favor a little bit to achieve actually some of these locations in a timely and appropriate fashion for you. So those are all of the Saga cards. I hope this little discussion about them has helped. If you have any more comments or things that pop out to you when you're playing this game, please leave the comments below. I love discussing cards this way. Now let's take a look at the Rune cards. So here we have the Rune cards. Now, I've got them laid out in 4 different decks, but rest assured they all have the same back. They actually all belong in the same deck when you're actually playing the game, and here's what the back looks like for them all. But I've divided them into 4 different piles here because I believe that there's essentially 4 different main types of cards that exist within the Rune card pile. And I want to break that down for you. If you have a different way that you like to think about these cards, please let me know. I'd love to talk about it with you. The first card we have over here on the left is what I call kind of the game modifier type cards. And these are the type of cards, they're really not vindictive, they're really not overly crazy, they just change things a little bit, and you might want to play this type of card during a game where this modification at that point in time in the game might benefit you more than maybe perhaps the next guy. But there's really nothing too crazy about them. So here, for example, goes change the type of goods counter in the goods in demand box. And again, now you get the +2 bonus for trading with that type of good. And so it's really nothing overly special. And there's 5 of these kind of cards, that the way I've organized them anyhow in the... I think there's a 5th. Oh yeah, this one was a 5th one. So there's 5 of these types of cards, and there's really nothing overly special about them. But then we move on to the next card. Now, one complaint you might hear about this game is some people get a little bit upset or a little teary-eyed because they're just not rolling the way that they thought they should. They're not getting their rolls. They're wasting a lot of expeditions going out, and it's just going back to the wintering box. And their Vikings got their tail stuck between their legs, or maybe their horn from their helmet stuck somewhere it shouldn't be. It's just, they're just upset because they're losing the dice rolls. Well, there are cards in this deck that are going to help you with that. So for example, let's look at the Valhalla card. And it goes, here you go, play before an attack. And again, and with these cards, an attack means either settling or raiding. So you can use before either one of these. It goes, you will suffer no losses in the coming attack, irrespective of the actual dice scores. So maybe this is a good card to be playing for one of those big cities when you're going in. It's a really low probability that you're actually going to get it. This might actually keep you out at sea for another season. You might have another crack at it your next turn. So you got that card, and we take another look card here at Siege. It goes again, play before an attack. And it goes, if your longboat begins the turn in a port, then add 1 to each die when attacking that port. So this is a good card to have if you've come into a port and during a previous turn, and maybe you want to, as one of your tasks or your only task in that port that turn, is you could maybe trade, reduce the actual defense of the port a little bit, then you wait your turn, and then on your next turn you start there, you play the siege, and now you've added 1 to your die, you've reduced the actual defense value of the port by trading with them in a previous turn. This might really turn things into your favor to be able to actually attack them. And there again is 5 of these types of cards in here. So again, that's 5 out of 33 different cards if you want to do the actual statistics on it all. So you got those 2 types of cards. This one's helping you out, but we don't have any of that, take that kind of card. Well, we're getting there. Don't worry about that. So we got another stack of cards here. There's 8 in here. And these are the cards they're going to help you benefit on your own. You're not really screwing anybody by doing these cards. Well, maybe you are indirectly, but you're just taking care of your own and trying to progress at a good rate. And here it goes, draw Rune cards to bring your hand up to the 3 card maximum. But here you don't have to spend any days to actually do that. So these are all things that are going to make you a lot stronger without necessarily weakening anybody else. And so the reason why I put these in a different pile than this first pile, because this first pile is something that affects everybody quite directly. It changes the situation of the game, whereas this is basically you're just beefing up your own cards. So let's get to the fun part. We got this deck of cards where there's 15 of them, which represents almost half of the cards in the deck. And this card, call this what you want. Call these cards the I've been holding a grudge against you since the last time we played games, and you screwed me over. Call this the you brought Miller Lite to games night and you're drinking my import beer and I'm angry at you. Call this you're in the lead and so I'm going to make sure I take care of this. Call this whatever you want. This is the screw you, take that, I'm a Viking and I am bad. And that is exactly what these types of cards are, and they are fantastic. And for me, this is where the game just really shines, because you got a good probability of getting these cards. So throughout the game, everyone's going to get these and everyone's going to be playing them to your advantage. So it's just fantastic, these cards. So let's take a little look at some of these. So here it goes. If you are adjacent to a port occupied by another longboat, you may move into that port at the usual cost of 1 day. Move the other longboat into an adjacent sea or river. This is fantastic. You go in there, it's called intimidation. I love it. You come in and basically your Vikings look meaner and have stronger weapons, and They basically intimidate the other guys out. And in that example I gave you before, maybe this other guy was sitting there waiting to do his raid. He went in there, traded, he's all set up for his next turn because he had this card. No, I don't think so. Get out of my port. And then you got other ones here where, let's take a look at this one. Choose a Viking. He must discard all of his Rune cards. Ooh! Brutal. So you see somebody, they're holding on to all 3 of their cards and you think that maybe they're starting to get a little bit too fresh with you. No, you're going to be punished by the gods. Get rid of those cards. Start building them up. And that is tough because now he's going to have to go back to a home port after he goes to the wintering box. He's going to have to use precious days to get more cards, and on it goes. So there's so many great cards like this in the deck, and it represents almost half of the cards in a Rune deck. So are these cards important? Absolutely. Are these cards critical to winning? The jury's out, but you definitely don't want to be left behind. And what makes these cards so unique and so powerful is that there are a lot of ways that you can improve your own situation, whether it be by improving your die or improving your own situation on your boat or where you are sailing. But there's a lot, about 1 and 2, opportunity to go after other people, and that's where I find the Vikingness, if I'm allowed to use a word like that, really shines in this game by actually playing these cards. And everybody but you loves it when these cards are played, when they're played against you, and it really makes a game shine. So there you have the Rune cards, but then again, recall that in the actual gameplay, all of them will be shuffled up into one pile. They'll be shuffled up a lot better than that, hopefully, or it'll be kind of a weird game, but they'll be shuffled up in one pile, and you put that off to the side, and there's the Rune cards. Well, I hope you enjoyed Fire and Axe, a Viking Saga. As you can tell throughout the course of this video, I really enjoy this game. It provides some extremely satisfying gaming experiences for me, and it's a game that you can pull out with 5 players, new players to the game, and you can get started just like that. Even though the video is a little bit longer, I like to get granular in the explanations, and I like to dig into it a little bit further so that by having a complete and comprehensive understanding of what's going on, you have the tools now to present it to your gaming group in a way that you think would work well for them. For me, this is a great game just to plunk down. It is clean, and it stays clean throughout the course of the game because the board doesn't get cluttered up with a bunch of different pieces and bits and colors and shapes and wooden cubes and all this stuff. No, it's just you, your longboat, some cities that are waiting to get ransacked and raided, and some people coming to settle. That's it. That's all that's going to be on here. And the cool thing about this game is by remaining simple and looking simple throughout the course of the game, you can focus on just a few little things that you need to do. Plus, there's only a few things that you can really do. You're going to be putting crewmen on your boat, some goods on your boats, and you're going to be sailing around. And then once you get into the ports, you're going to have a variety of tasks that you can do, and it's pretty simple. You want to trade, raid, or settle. It's that simple. And so you're up and you're playing like that. And that's the great thing about this game, because when you get a group of people and they want to have a good time and they want to have a little bit of take that action here, that ties thematically awesome into a Viking game. Because I know of some other Viking games that I've played where I feel that the Viking theme has just been pasted on. I don't feel like I'm a Viking. Whereas here with the Rune cards and with the ability to block people out of things, or even the ability to kind of scoop in and take a set from somebody when they're waiting on trying to, for example, achieve the 3rd and final thing to get a card, and you're able to swoop in there and on some good dice rolls be able to take it right out from under their noses, that's just extremely satisfying. And for me personally, I love the roll of the dice in this game. Other people don't, and again, I've mentioned this before, is one complaint will be that some people don't like this. And I like that. Again, thematically it's relevant because sometimes Odin just favors one Viking over the other. Just similarly, some people can roll the dice and you can't. And there are dice mitigation factors that actually exist within the game, so use those to your advantage. So I believe that although you may get hung up on the dice, I don't believe it's a showstopper. It doesn't stop me from enjoying this game, because one thing that's very certain in this game, if you're playing this with a full complement of people, there's going to be times when you screw somebody, there's going to be times when they screw you. There's going to be times when you are excited and you are praising the dice, and there's going to be times when you're angry and you're cursing the dice, just throwing them across the way. There's going to be times when you play a Rune card on somebody to pow wow, gotcha. And there's going to be times when that happens back to you. If you can't handle that kind of interaction and those dips and the ebb and flow of a game like that, because there's going to be lows and highs and lows and highs, and sometimes you're going to be sitting there like, oh, there's no way I'm ever going to win this game. But then you adapt. Being the true Viking that you are, you adapt. You go, wait a second, everyone's going over here. I'm going to go off and do my own thing, and maybe I can kind of slide in and catch back up and kind of lay low for a little bit before people realize that I'm actually starting to do quite well. And that's a perfectly valid strategy. There's lots of ways here, but this game complements and this game rewards the Viking. It rewards the player who can adapt to change, who can foresee the change that's going to occur, and change accordingly before everyone else can, and that will be the victor. Now, that being said, if you're playing with all equally skilled players, it's very likely that a few tosses of the die or a few lucky draws of Rune Cards that may be slightly more advantageous than the other, that may determine the winner. But who cares? You just had 2 fantastic hours of these ebbs and these flows, these highs and these lows, and it's just been a fantastic night of gaming. If you're going to go and curl up in the fetal position on the floor in a dark room somewhere in your house after everybody leaves and cry yourself to sleep because you lost the game because you felt that it was a bad dice roll, well, then this wasn't the game for you. Go play Monopoly. Go play something else. But if you're the type of person who afterwards you go, you know what? You beat me. You know, good game. Shake your hand, and then it's over. Fantastic, and you're just happy to be able to have a good time and laugh at other people's misfortunes and cheer in your own fortunes throughout the game, regardless of how it all ends, then this, my friend, is the game for you. As you can tell, I'm really excited about it, and if you're excited about it, please let me know. Please leave a comment one way or the other. I love to hear. Come find me on Facebook, Connect More Board Games, or find me on Board Game Geek. I'm there, Connect More. I would love to hear more from you. I would love to hear your experiences, and most importantly, are you excited for this game to come back out in 2015? Is this a grail game for you? Why or why not? And has this video helped this game become on your want list? I certainly hope it has. Enough talking. I want to play this game again. That's all for now. Cheers.